Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing my November book wrap-up, which is mostly Goth Lit November. There are a few books that aren't, but I'll get to those at the end. So I started out with what sometimes is, my books are all gonna fall over, called Res Gothic or Indigenous Gothic. So a couple of these are Canadian authors, and I'm not really sure that I would say they're entirely Indigenous Gothic, but they certainly have Gothic elements. So this is Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. Glare again today, good. There is, Glorious Northern Gothic. So this is set mostly on the west coast, north of the Pacific Northwest in the US, in BC there. A boy in the community goes missing at sea, and so it's about figuring that out and figuring out how to deal with it. And so his sister sets off in search for him to Monkey Beach, a shore famed for its Sasquatch sightings. It is a bit dark sometimes, but also I've been to a couple events with Eden Robinson, and she laughs more and more enthusiastically than anybody I think I've ever met in my life. It's wonderful. So there's a lot of humor in it too. And then I read Tomson Highway, Kiss of the Fur Queen. And this was really good. I love this one. It's, so the two boys left their northern Manitoba Cree family to go to residential school. And it did not treat them well, as you might expect. Although Tomson Highway has, as far as I know, very few complaints about his experience at residential school. He has written about other people's negative experiences. And so these two boys are given new names, they have to learn the new language, and eventually they end up in Winnipeg. And so it's about them trying to figure out Winnipeg. And the Fur Queen is this figure that sort of looks over them through their life. I'm not sure that's quite how I would describe it, but anyway, she's there in the background throughout their lives, and their lives take very different turns in Winnipeg, and they handle having been sexually abused very differently, and they just really can't understand each other anymore. So it's mostly the story of the relationship between the two brothers, but it does have some Gothic elements. This is Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. It's shiny. I'd heard that it had Gothic elements, and I guess it kind of does, although personally, and I'm not a horror expert, I'm just dipping my toes in, but I might categorize this more as folk horror, except it uses elements of Cree folk beliefs instead of Christian folk beliefs. So that's that. It's set mostly in Vancouver, and then where her family lives in, I want to say Saskatchewan, somewhere on the prairies. Anyway, Alberta. Somewhere in Alberta, she returns home, and they deal with this haunting. So she's being haunted by her dead sister, who's passed away a year before, and she hasn't really even attempted to deal with that in any way. She literally ran away to Vancouver, and hasn't really been in touch with most of her family since then. And so this is about her going back home and trying to come to terms with that loss. Crows feature a lot. There are a lot of crows, and ghosts and ghostly mythological figures, and it's fascinating. I really liked it. For a first book ever, it was really impressive. Also, I broke out, I should have said this at the beginning. For some of these, I broke out tarot decks that matched, and for this one I broke out the Crow Tarot because there are so many crows. And this is basically the card of the book. It went really well with this book. Finishing sentences, good. Okay, and then I started, and I haven't finished this yet, Moon of the Crusted Snow, but in French, Neige des lunes brisées. the crusted snow is that snow where it's like icy crust on the surface that you break through and it's all powdery underneath, that you kind of get at this time of year. That's the month of the year that the moon of the crusted snow is for the Anishinaabe. And so Waubgeshig Rice, who wrote this, is Anishinaabe from somewhere in Ontario. Hang on. Wasauksing. And basically they're on a reserve, I think in northwest, central west Ontario, somewhere there, where the power goes out and cell phone service goes out, and they're so far removed from the city centers in Ontario, southern Ontario, that they're not sure at first what happened. And then things south of them go very, very wrong when power is not restored. So it is a dystopian novel. It's very atmospheric, at least in English. I don't know if I'll be able to get that in that way in French, because I'm using this as a way to practice learning French. But yeah, it's fun. I'm gonna put that in a different pile because I have to finish it. Okay, and then so this was by a Canadian author who I'd never heard of, The Specimen by Jaima Fixsen. It's set in Edinburgh, and it's so good. I paired it with the Lioness Oracle Tarot, and she basically, the first 20% or so is just this woman and her son, but you know that her son is going to die, so that's not a spoiler. And you're pretty sure you know who the murderer is, so that's not really a spoiler either. But this doctor may have taken the boy for his heart because he collects unique specimens, human specimens, so it's the story of this woman trying to get something resembling justice or revenge for her son. And that actually has a line coming with the cover. And it's a beautiful book. It's a heartbreaking book, but also you cheer for her and want her to somehow succeed. I'm not sure I had any sort of picture of what success for her would look like at the beginning of the book, but yeah, and trying to get some of the police to take her seriously and not just consider her a hysterical woman who lost her son is a bit of a challenge as well. So she sort of, for much of the book, takes matters into her own hands and really does quite well. So yeah, that was a really good book. I will keep an eye out for other books from that author. Then I read some tropical Gothic, or Latin American Gothic if you prefer. And so, and there goes my, good, very good, excellent. Human Sacrifices by Fernanda Ampuero was phenomenal. She is from Ecuador. Oh, this was the book from the Feminist Press that I was trying to think of the other day when I was filming the acquisitions video. Apparently they do excellent books of short stories. So this is a book that confronts machismo, inequity, and violence. There's a lot of violence against women and girls in this book. Beneath considers the decay and oppression beneath the surface of our humid and hostile world, where those on the margins must pay the price for the comfort and safety of the elite. And I don't think there was any story in here that I didn't love. They were all fantastic, which is unusual in a collection of short stories. And she has another book that's a bit older than this called Cockfight, I think, which I will also definitely read. And then I read this one, Giovanna Rivero, Fresh Dirt from the Grave. She is Bolivian? I think she's Bolivian. And has been compared to Mariana Enriquez, who I also read this month. She's reworked the boundaries of the Gothic to engage with folktales, sci-fi, and eroticism, finding in the wounds of her characters their humanity and the possibility of hope. There were a couple, so these are longer short stories. There are 6 of them. So they're not as long as novellas, but they're not short stories. And there was only one that I didn't like, and I really didn't like it. Like, it wasn't that I thought, like, I didn't have an overtly negative experience. I just couldn't keep getting through it. I couldn't keep going with it. I mean, I did eventually, but I had trouble holding my interest. But the rest of them are fantastic. The first one is, if you've ever read Women Talking or seen the movie, that story of the Mennonite women who were assaulted in their colony in Bolivia. It's her take on that, and it's excellent. Fish, Turtle, Vulture is also excellent. A man survives being shipwrecked and goes home to meet the mother of one of the boys who didn't survive the shipwreck. There are a couple others at the end that were pretty good. So this was more mixed for me than Human Sacrifices, but still overall pretty good. And then I did read, finally, Fresh Dirt from the Grave that was this one. The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. I lost my spot in my Google Doc here. By Mariana Enriquez. I had read, somewhere I have her other book of short stories, but I can't see it right now. Anyway, I read her first one. This is, I think, is her second one, and she's got a third one out now that I think I've put on hold at the library. Anyway, I love her short stories. They're fantastic. They're creepy. They're weird. Love them. And then I got into American Gothic. So I've read all of Toni Morrison's novels at one point. But in preparing for this Gothic November, I read something saying that Sula was Gothic as well as Beloved. And so I couldn't remember what about Sula was Gothic, so I reread it. And I'm not entirely sure I'd say it is Gothic, but it does have Gothic components as well. And it is wonderful. I mean, it's Toni Morrison. She's always going to be a favorite. No complaints. Then I read, my stack is going to fall over again, The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. I'd never read any of her stories before, so this was a first, and I really liked The Bloody Chamber. That was the best one. The Tiger's Bride was also quite good. I liked that one. And The Courtship of Mr. Leon. Some of the ones in the middle, Puss in Boots, The Earl King, The Snow Child, were a little, yeah, sure, fine, didn't wow me. The ones at the end, The Werewolf, The Company of Wolves, and Wolf Alice, I liked better as well. So the beginning ones and the end ones I liked the most. Probably I'd consider reading more of her at some point. And right now, as in today, I'm reading, there's a Benito, hang on, I'm gonna get the guy's name wrong. Benito Cereno. It's a Spanish name, I assume, or Melville's idea of a Spanish name. It's a short story that apparently is Gothic. It is very weird and atmospheric, and something is very wrong. But I'm only about halfway through it, so I don't know yet what is wrong. But something is very, very wrong. There is, I will say, a fair amount of racism in the book. One of the ships is a slave ship, and the captain, Benito Cereno, is the captain of that slave ship and does not, well, it's always a bit interesting figuring out Melville's ideas on this. I don't know if he outright spoke about it at any point or wrote about it in a, nonfiction. In Moby Dick, I felt like he was trying to push back against racist stereotypes and maybe didn't always quite succeed. And that might be the case in this book as well. But certainly some of the characters are quite racist because, I mean, there's a slave ship. And even the other captain doesn't like... So there are 2 ships and 2 captains, and the captain who is not Benito Cereno, who's Captain Delano, is the narrator, and he has criticisms of the other captain, but one of those criticisms is not that he's the captain of a slave ship, it's how he is an ineffectual commander. So, there's that. But, I mean, Melville's writing is always beautiful, and I don't I don't know how it will end yet because there is something clearly very off happening. So yes, that's quite fun so far. Like it's atmospheric and weird. And then I listened to The Lottery and Other Stories and Dark Tales by Shirley Jackson. In The Lottery and Other Stories, I really liked The Lottery. I thought it was far and away the best one. There were some other stories I liked, but none that I loved. In Dark Tales, I thought they were overall better. They just interested me more personally. Like that's totally subjective. Other people love The Lottery and Other Stories. So it's not that I have like objective criticisms of Shirley Jackson in that one. It's just my personal preference. Oh, and I should say I did break out. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to see it. The Gothic Tarot. For some of the American ones, Shirley Jackson, because it's very Edgar Allan Poe, this Gothic Tarot deck. Then British Gothic. So I reread Wuthering Heights. Don't fall over. Which is an all-time favorite. It was my favorite when I originally read through all the Bronte's books in university. It was my all-time favorite of all of them. And then I've read it at least twice since then. And I've read Jane Eyre 2 or 3 times as well. And I think Jane Eyre is, it's definitely my favorite now of the two of them. It's moved into the first position overall. But I really do love this book. It's weird. It's wild. It's not really a love story. It's more like a revenge story. Somebody described it on YouTube the other day as a love story, and I was like, we have very different conceptions of what that would look like, because there's not a lot of love or treating people well at all in this book. People treat each other spectacularly badly in this book, and for more than one generation, and it's just brutal. It really is the sort of generational impact on people of how we treat each other. Like, one of the characters is, so Heathcliff, I think of him more like the Jotun in Norse mythology. He's a person, but he's also a force of nature. And when he becomes hell-bent on revenge, it goes very badly for everybody for a very long time. And it's a fascinating character study. It's a beautifully written book. I love it. The people are not nice people for the most part. Then I read O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker, that I think Bailey at the Bailey Grind had read last year. I think for Gothland November, or she read at some point. And it was amazing, and I loved it. And I wish I'd read it when I was younger, because I could relate a lot with the main character, Janet. She's very sweet. She's very weird. She relates more to books and animals than to people, which I sympathize with. So yeah, it's a good one. And it's set in a castle in Scotland, so it's got all the Gothic atmosphere going on. Yeah, love it. The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, I also really liked. It was a little weirder, and it's more overtly a ghost story. It's been compared, I think, to The Turn of the Screw. And the reason I don't think it's like that, I mean, the writing style is totally different, but the main reason is because, in my view, it's pretty obviously a ghost story the whole time. Whereas in Turn of the Screw, you don't really know if it's a ghost story or a story of, like, the mental breakdown of the governess. And nevertheless, it is very creepy, and the ending is exceptional and creepy and horrifying. And so, yes, I did like that one. I may watch the movie now, because I've heard good things about that too. And I've never seen it, because I'm one of those snobs who always want to read the books first, even though they're not always better. They're usually better. Every now and again, a movie will surprise me. But yeah, I've heard good things about that, so I may watch it. Although I'm a terrible movie watcher. I say that and then I'll like start watching a movie and pause it to do something else, and then, you know, 6 months later I'll think I should finish that movie. Yeah, well. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I listened to the audiobook because I had the audiobook for that one. And I think it was his first novel or early days novel. The actual plot was not my all-time favorite. It's weird. It's fun. It's the London Underground, like below the city of London. And it's a lot of fun. Like, it's an interesting premise. The characters, though, were more interesting to me than the plot. And despite accusations against him, which I do realize have tarnished my opinion of him, I do really like his writing style. It's just so inventive and so much fun. And now I'm listening to Gothic Tales by Arthur Conan Doyle. I had not realized that Arthur Conan Doyle had written Gothic stories. He has. They're fun, as you might expect. And I'm only partway through. I'll probably finish listening to them at work this week. But there's one that I'm just about done now, set, I think, not at the North Pole, but like somewhere on a boat, like a ship. I don't know boat things, okay? Sorry, apologies if I've offended the ship people. On some sort of ship in the Arctic. It's creepy and cold, and I like it. It's a really good story, that one, so far. Yes. And then I read, so I didn't read as much nonfiction as I had planned to, because this took longer than I thought it would, because the month, in terms of reading physical books, the month sort of got away from me. There were a couple of weeks where I just didn't read as much as I usually do because work was exasperated sigh. Anyway, the Cambridge Companion to Gothic Fiction is, you can't really see that, excellent. Sort of. It's a lot of fun. I learned a lot. There are chapters on, can I find the introduction? Introduction. The genesis of Gothic fiction, the 1870s, 1870s, I just made that up, the 1790s, when it really got going, the French and German Gothic, so I appreciated that because there were definitely things about French and German genres happening kind of at the same time that I was totally unaware of, and I've now got some tabs in here of things marked that I have to read. Gothic fictions and romantic writing, so there was a romantic genre prior to Gothic fiction, and then it continued, and it's the more, well, I was gonna say it's the more soap opera-y, but I don't know, man, some of the early Gothic novels were pretty melodramatic. And so anyway, it discusses the connections between those. Scottish and Irish Gothic, also didn't know much about those, but like Scotland does seem an ideal setting for Gothic fiction, so good for them. English Gothic theatre, which I also didn't know much about. I really hadn't heard of many of the plays. The Victorian Gothic, which was the area that I knew the most about, I think, because that's like the Brontes and Dickens and whatnot. The rise of the American Gothic. So Poe was actually earlier than I thought he was. He was slightly earlier than Hawthorne. They overlapped. For some reason, I always thought he was later than that, but nope. And then there's some later British Gothic fiction into the early 1900s. The Gothic on screen, that was pretty interesting. Colonial and post-colonial Gothic, the Caribbean, so that's like the Wide Sargasso Sea and things like that that are critiquing in fiction some of the tropes in the Victorian Gothic about like the dangerous other and things like that, which was really interesting. The contemporary Gothic, Why Be Needed. This was also mostly film. I was sort of hoping for more novels in this section because this was published in, I think, 2008 or somewhere around there. And, but it didn't really talk about contemporary Gothic novels. It talked about contemporary Gothic films, which, I mean, is fun if you're a film person, as discussed. I'm not really. Although I do sometimes feel like I should watch more noir, because the ones I've watched I really like. Like, I think if I had a film genre, that might be it. And then after Gothic, consumption machines and black holes. That was a fun chapter too, just exploring what might come next. Although those last 2 chapters did leave me wanting a follow-up, because of course there is a lot of Gothic that has come next from people from all over the world. So I kind of want them to do a 2nd edition, because I'm a geek, in case that wasn't exceedingly obvious. All right, then I read Writing Poetry in the Dark by Stephanie, edited by Stephanie M. Wojtowicz. So there's another book called Writing in the Dark, which is about horror genre, speculative fiction, dark fiction, that sort of thing. I have not read that one, but I got the poetry one because it sounded intriguing, and it really was. There were no essays I disliked. There were some I vehemently disagree with, but that's not the same thing. I'm okay with that. And so, and then some that gave me a lot of ideas. So it was really interesting to read. And then one of the contributors to that wrote Into the Forest and All the Way Through. Which one? What prize did it win? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, it's on there. Can I read that? No, I can't. It's tiny. Bram Stoker Awards nominee. I'm old now, apparently. I can't read the tiny font. Anyway, it is... I finished it today. I'm not quite sure how to describe it because it started off really strong. And I really liked a lot in the beginning, which is saying something because I don't really like free verse. It's not my thing. If I could find contemporary metered verse, I would be thrilled. But it's really hard to find. And free verse is often so bad. Now, her poetry is not bad. It's as I said, it started out really strong. It got a bit exhausting to read. And I don't think that has much to do with the quality of her writing so much as the content. So she's writing about missing and murdered women all across the States over several decades. So she's got, I don't know if you can see that, the poem and then the information about the woman or girl. And some of them are kids who went missing and when they went missing and which police department to contact and all that sort of thing. And it's depressing. It's really depressing. It's frustrating. I mean, so that's not a bad thing, reading a book like this. You wouldn't want to be happy about reading a book like this, but it did get a bit wearing after a while because it's just so relentless. So is that all of Gothic? That's the Gothic. Come on, can I unbig my screen on whatever words? Okay, then other books that I read this month, because when library audiobooks come in, you just have to read them because they have a wait list of like 4 months. So what can you do? I listened to The Night Guest by Hildur Knotsdottir. She's an Icelandic author. I really want more of her books to be translated because this, I think, was the first one translated into English, and it was really good. It was not perfect. It could have been longer. It was really short, a very short novel. And I felt like there were definitely things that could have been fleshed out a little bit more, but it was creepy and weird and really disconcerting and fun to read. It definitely falls more into the horror genre, some manner of horror genre rather than Gothic. And then She Fell by Alicia Elliott is also a bit, that one's a bit more like Turn of the Screw in that you don't know. There are moments where you don't know if she's imagining things because she has postpartum depression. She might have postpartum psychosis. There are definitely moments where she's dealing with like moments of racism and things because she's Indigenous. And so the way I read it, I totally believed her when those moments happened because they happen. But then there were times where her husband would say, oh no, they didn't mean anything by it or whatever. And so it sort of starts out like that, but then things get weird and weirder and weirder, and she starts seeing weirder and weirder things. And because of the way it's set up, you can't really tell if she's actually seeing these things and her husband is actually gaslighting her, or if she's having a psychotic break of some sort. And it's fascinating. It really, I'm not sure it would be a good movie because it's so in her head the whole time, but it would make a fantastic opera. I DNF'd The Ritual by Adam Neville. I was looking forward to that. It's apparently folk horror. I didn't really get to any folk horror bits because I DNF'd it in about the first third or so, and couldn't stand any of the characters. They were all either boring or annoying. Like, one of these. There was nothing that interested me in the characters in the first third of the book. I couldn't cope with them. And then Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. So I'd read Cabin at the End of the World by him and didn't love it. There were too many plot holes that I didn't believe. Like, I didn't buy into the reason that certain characters would behave in a certain way, given the information that we got. This one, though, was really good. It was really creepy, and given reality TV culture, a little too plausible. So a girl, again, it plays with that thing of, is she going crazy, or is the world around her nuts? Because the world around her is definitely nuts. And she ends up, allegedly, in order to be able to help her and pay the rent and so on, after he lost his job, after her father lost his job, the parents agree to have their daughter be the star of this reality TV show, which is hugely exploitative of a girl who's probably mentally ill. But then at a certain point, you can't tell if she's messing with them, if she's really losing her grip on reality, or if she's possibly the only sane person there. I don't know. It's weird, but it's really good. The Prey by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir, is also really good. It's really creepy. It's one of these, like, isolated in the snow in Iceland in the winter, kind of horror-ish. It's not really horror. It's got horror elements. It's more thriller suspense, I think, than horror. It's described as a nail-biting, ice-cold tale of horror. I mean, people die, which is horrible. But I'm not sure there are a lot of outright horror elements. But it's a really well set up novel, and I did not know what the end was going to be until the end, which was fun. In her books, her standalone books in particular, she's got a couple series of books which are super fun, but her standalone books are so atmospheric and eerie and just, like, skin-crawlingly, there's something wrong. Like, not gross, eerie, but they're so good. I love her. She's got another book coming out this winter too, so hey, that's exciting. I've pre-ordered it. Totally unrelated to any of this genre fiction, I read James by Percival Everett because it came in at the library, and he was up for, like, all the awards this year, and it is a response to Huck Finn, and it was so cool to read. It's been a while since I've read Huckleberry Finn, and there were things that were different than I remembered, particularly the ending, which he changed, and then also elements of how Huck viewed Jim at the beginning were different than I recall from the book. So he didn't stick strictly to the plot of Twain's book, but it's the same two characters and their relationships with each other, but told from the perspective of Jim, and it's really good. Loved it. I love that sort of response to books, like Wide Sargasso Sea. It's fascinating to me. And then the last book was The Service Berry. It's just a little book, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer. At first, I was mildly, like a tiny bit, annoyed at the price for the size, because it's a little book, but it costs as much as a normal book, pretty well, at least in Canada. And but she's donating all of it to some sort of environmental organization, of Indigenous environmental something or other. I can't remember. It's in the introduction somewhere. So fine. But it's a beautiful book, and I think we're going to need a lot more of the gift economy in the future, because everything is so precarious and challenging in the regular economy. And I have a hard time imagining that getting any better in the near future. So gift economy, reciprocity, it's beautifully written, as you would expect, and none of the ideas are necessarily unexpected given her other books, but it is a nice little concise. I'm gonna take it home and see if anybody in my family wants to read it, because it's a good one. And that is my books I've read in November. Hooray! Thank you very much to Rachel and Bailey for hosting Goth Lit November again. I hope they do it every year, because it's fun, and I've still got a lot of books I didn't get to this year. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.